She had built an empire from nothing, and in one night, someone was going to bury her alive. The parking garage was silent except for the sound of her own breathing. Victoria Hale, 30 years old, CEO of a billion-dollar company, a woman whose name appeared on the covers of business magazines, was crouching behind a concrete pillar with blood on her palm and no phone signal. The men outside weren't robbers, they were sent. And the person who sent them had been sitting 3 offices down from her for the past 4 years. She had trusted the wrong people, and now she was about to pay for it. If this story already has you hooked, you're exactly where you need to be. Subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss what comes next, because the stories we tell here do not let go easily. If you're watching right now, drop a like and tell us in the comments what city or country you're watching from. We want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to the beginning. The offices of Hale Technologies sat on the 43rd floor of a glass tower in downtown Chicago, and on a clear morning you could see the lake from Victoria's desk. A flat steel gray sheet of water stretching to the horizon like it had no intention of ending. She used to love that view, used to stand at the window with her first coffee of the day and let the quiet of it settle something inside her before the phone started ringing. She hadn't stood at that window in 3 weeks. 3 weeks ago, she had found the file. It wasn't even supposed to be on her desk. Her assistant had placed it there by mistake, a quarterly compliance folder meant for the legal department, thin and boring looking, the kind of thing that got signed and filed and forgotten. Victoria had flipped it open purely out of habit, scanning the first page while she was on a call, and then her hand had stopped moving. A transaction. $46 million routed through a subsidiary she didn't recognize. The subsidiary didn't appear anywhere in the company's public filings. The approval signature at the bottom wasn't hers, it was Damian Cross's. She'd ended the call without saying goodbye. Damian Cross was 52 years old and had been with Hale Technologies for 11 years, longer than Victoria had been CEO. He was the kind of man who wore expensive watches but never talked about money, who remembered the names of everyone's children, who gave speeches at company retreats about integrity and accountability that made people in the audience actually believe him. He was also, Victoria had slowly come to understand over the past 3 weeks, one of the most dangerous people she had ever been near. The $46 million was only the beginning. The deeper she dug, carefully, quietly, using a forensic accountant she paid in cash and met at a coffee shop in Evanston, the worse it got. Shell companies, payments to firms that didn't exist, client data sold to competitors, and buried underneath all of it, something darker, blackmail. Damian had been collecting information on board members, government contacts, regulators. He used it to keep people quiet. He used it to stay untouchable. Victoria had gone back and forth about what to do for 2 weeks. She had nearly called the FBI twice. Both times she pulled back because she didn't yet know how deep it went, how many people inside the company already knew, how many were involved, who she could actually trust. That was her mistake. Waiting. Because while she was being careful, Damian was watching. She didn't know that until the night of November 14th. The board dinner had run long, set 3 hours of polite conversation and bad salmon at a hotel downtown, the kind of event Victoria usually endured with a professional smile and left the moment it was acceptable to do so. Her driver had texted to say he was caught in traffic 5 minutes out, and she told him to meet her at the parking structure on Wabash rather than the hotel entrance. It was 2 blocks away. She'd walked it a dozen times. The garage was mostly empty by 9:30. A few cars on the upper levels, the fluorescent lights doing their usual half-hearted job of illuminating the concrete columns and low ceiling. Her heels clicked against the floor as she walked toward the elevator, already thinking about the documents she needed to review when she got home. She didn't notice the first man until he stepped out from behind a support pillar near the stairwell. He was large, set not in a soft way, in the way of someone who had spent time somewhere that required it. He was wearing a dark jacket, no tie, and he was looking directly at her with an expression that had no politeness in it at all. "Ms. Hale," he said. Not a question. She stopped walking. Something in her stomach dropped. A second man appeared from her left, closer, between her and the elevator. "Your phone," the first one said. "Hand it over, and this goes easy." Victoria was not a person who panicked quickly. She had sat across from hostile investors, navigated a near bankruptcy at 27, testified before a congressional subcommittee when she was 29. She knew how to keep her voice level when everything inside her was moving fast. "I don't know who sent you," she said, "but whatever he's paying you, it's not enough for what happens when this goes wrong." The first man smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Nobody sent us anywhere. This is just a robbery." "It's really not," Victoria said. He took a step toward her. She ran. Not toward the elevator, toward the far end of the garage, deeper into the structure, because that was where the stairwell was, and the stairwell had a fire exit to the alley, and she needed open space. She needed noise. She needed to not be in a concrete box with two men who were now running after her. She made it about 40 feet. The third man she hadn't seen stepped out from behind a parked SUV and caught her arm, spinning her hard into the side of the vehicle. The impact knocked the breath out of her, and she lost the grip on her bag. The phone skidded across the floor. She heard it hit the wall and watched the screen crack. Crack. "Stop." The first man was calm again now. He walked toward her unhurried, hands loose at his sides. "We're not here to hurt you, Ms. Hale. We just need you to come with us for a few hours while some things get sorted out. You understand?" "Sorted out," she repeated. "Mr. Cross wants a conversation." There it was. She had needed to hear it, and now she had. And it was somehow worse than she'd expected. Her back was against the SUV, the third man's hand still on her arm, and she was calculating distances and exits and finding none of them promising. "Let go of her." The voice came from behind them, quiet, flat, carrying no particular emotion, like someone pointing out that a door was left open. All three men turned. Standing about 15 feet away, near the entrance to the stairwell, was a man in a plain dark jacket holding two paper grocery bags. He looked maybe mid-30s, a little worn around the edges. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't moved. He was just standing there, looking at the scene in front of him with an expression that was difficult to read. Not afraid, not angry, just very, very focused. "Walk away," the first man said. "This doesn't concern you." "I'm going to ask one more time," the man with the groceries said. "Let go of her." The first man made a small gesture with his chin to the one standing nearest the newcomer. What happened in the next 7 seconds was something Victoria would spend a long time trying to describe afterward and never quite managing to. The man in the jacket put the grocery bags down, gently, like he didn't want the eggs to break. And then he moved, and the man who had been sent toward him was on the floor before she fully understood what she was watching. Then the second man. The third man released her arm and turned and lasted slightly longer, maybe 4 seconds, before he joined the others on the concrete. None of them were dead. She could hear them breathing, groaning, one of them cursing quietly. They were just comprehensively and efficiently no longer a threat. The man in the jacket picked his grocery bags back up. He walked toward her. She pressed herself against the SUV before she could stop herself. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. He stopped a few feet away and didn't come closer. His breathing was almost normal. "Are you okay? Did anyone hurt you?" "I'm fine." She wasn't entirely, but her arm would bruise, and that was the worst of it. "Who are you?" "My name is Ethan. I live 2 blocks from here." He glanced at the men on the ground with the look of someone checking a piece of work they weren't fully satisfied with. "I cut through this garage most nights. I wasn't expecting that." "You weren't expecting—" She stopped, looked at the 3 men, looked at him. "You're a civilian." Something shifted in his face. Not quite a reaction, more like the absence of one. Something like that. "Is there someone you can call? You should get out of here." "My phone is broken." She pointed at the cracked screen on the floor. "And my driver is compromised. And 3 of those men know my name, which means this wasn't random, which means my security detail was compromised too, which means I don't know who I can call right now." She said it fast, matter of fact, the way she handled problems. Lay out the facts first, figure out the feeling later. But when she finished saying it, the reality of it landed differently than it had in her head. She was completely alone. Ethan looked at her for a moment, then he looked at the men on the floor again. One of them was starting to sit up. "Okay," Ethan said. He shifted the grocery bags in his arms. "There's a diner on Michigan. I know the owner. We can go there. You can use their phone, and you can figure out who to call. It'll be crowded enough that nobody is going to try anything." "Why would you help me?" He seemed to find the question mildly confusing, like she'd asked him something with an obvious answer. Because you needed help. Victoria Hale had been in business for 8 years. She had been lied to by investment bankers, charmed by people who wanted her money, flattered by people who wanted her influence, and threatened by people who wanted her afraid. She was not easily read. She did not trust quickly. She had built her entire career on the understanding that most people, when they offered something, wanted something back. She looked at Ethan Walker standing in a parking garage with grocery bags and a completely calm expression, and she could not find the angle. She could not find what he wanted. "Okay," she said. "The diner." They walked toward the garage exit, leaving 3 men on the concrete floor of level 2 and the scattered contents of Victoria's bag. Everything except her wallet, which Ethan had quietly retrieved from the ground and handed to her without comment. Outside, the November air was cold and sharp. The street was still busy with foot traffic. Normal people going about normal evenings, nobody looking at them, nobody aware that anything had happened in the structure behind them. Ethan walked beside her, not in front, not in a way that crowded her. He kept about 2 feet of distance, and he scanned the street as they moved. She noticed that. It wasn't the scan of someone who was nervous. It was the scan of someone who had made a habit of knowing what was around them. "You do this often?" she asked. "Walk home with groceries?" "Get involved." He thought about it for a second. "No," he said. "Not if I can help it." She wanted to ask what that meant. She didn't yet. They walked another half a block in silence. A cab honked somewhere behind them. Steam rose from a grate in the sidewalk. Her hand was still shaking, though she had it pressed against her coat to keep it still. "Who were they?" Ethan asked. He didn't look at her when he said it. Victoria was quiet for a moment. "People I should have dealt with sooner, before they dealt with you." "Yes." He nodded slowly, like he understood something about the shape of that without needing the details. And he didn't ask for the details. He just kept walking, adjusting his grip on the grocery bags, navigating around a slow-moving couple on the sidewalk. At the corner of Michigan, before they reached the diner, he stopped. "There's something I should tell you," he said. She waited. "Those men in the garage, they're going to get up, and whoever sent them is going to know it didn't work." He looked at her steadily. "So whatever plan you had before tonight, you probably need a new one." Victoria looked out at the street. The city moved around them, indifferent, loud, alive. She thought about the file on her desk, the $46 million, the shell companies, Damien's careful, patient, 11-year construction of something that could destroy her and everyone in the building who had nothing to do with it. She thought about the fact that she had spent 3 weeks trying to solve this quietly, carefully, on her own. And that in the time she'd been doing that, Damien had put 3 men in a parking garage with her name in their mouths. "I know," she said. They went inside. The diner on Michigan was called Patsy's, and it had been there since 1987, which you could tell from the laminated menus, and the way the booths had been repaired so many times. The vinyl had different shades of red, depending on which section you sat in. The owner, a heavy-set man named Gerald, who wore the same Bears cap every night, nodded at Ethan when they walked in like he was expected, which apparently he nearly was. Ethan came through 4 or 5 nights a week, Gerald told Victoria without being asked, always around the same time, always the same corner booth if it was open. It was open. They sat down. Gerald brought coffee without being asked and looked at Victoria's hand. She hadn't noticed she was still pressing it against her coat, and disappeared into the back without a word. He came back 2 minutes later with a small first aid kit and set it on the table between them like it was a breadbasket. "I'm fine," Victoria said. "Your palm's bleeding," Ethan said. She looked down. It was. She'd scraped it on the SUV and hadn't registered it properly until now. She pulled a piece of gauze from the kit and pressed it against the heel of her hand. The sting arrived late, the way pain sometimes did when your body had been busy with other things. Ethan wrapped both hands around his coffee mug and didn't say anything while she dealt with it. He was good at silence, not the uncomfortable kind that needed filling, but the kind that left room for other people to think. She noticed that too. "You said you weren't expecting it," she said, "getting involved. I'm not usually in situations like that. But you knew what to do." He looked at the mug. "I used to." She waited. He didn't add anything to it, and she was experienced enough with people to recognize when someone had said exactly as much as they intended to say. She let it go. For now. She used Gerald's phone, a landline, actual plastic, mounted on the wall near the kitchen, to call Marcus Webb, the only person inside her legal team she was reasonably sure hadn't been turned. Marcus picked up on the second ring. When she told him what had happened, there was a silence on his end that lasted long enough for her to count 4 seconds. "Don't go home," he said. "Don't go to the office. Don't use your corporate card." "I know, Marcus." "Victoria, if Cross already moved on you, he's not waiting anymore. Whatever timeline you thought you had." "I know," she said again. "I need you to pull everything we have and sit on it. Don't send it anywhere yet. And I need you to find out which of my security team he got to." "All of them," Marcus said. He said it quietly, like he'd been holding it. "I found out this afternoon. I was going to call you after the dinner. I'm sorry. I should have called earlier." The diner noise continued around her. Someone's plate sliding across a counter, 2 men laughing at the far end of the room, the television above the register showing a weather forecast for snow. She stood with the receiver against her ear and breathed through the information. "I'll be in touch," she said. "Don't call my cell." She hung up and stood there for a moment with her hand still on the receiver. When she got back to the booth, Ethan was looking out the window at the street. He'd moved her coffee closer to her side of the table. She sat down. "All of them," she said. He looked at her. He understood what she meant without needing context. "Okay," he said. "I need somewhere to stay tonight that isn't connected to my name. A hotel I can pay cash for. Somewhere. I have a couch," he said. It came out straightforward, no hesitation, no particular weight to it. Then he seemed to reconsider the phrasing and added, "My daughter's home. She's 8. So it's not a great situation, but it's safe. Nobody's looking for you there." Victoria looked at him across the table. A man she'd known for approximately 40 minutes, who had put 3 people on the ground in a parking garage and was now offering her a couch in an apartment with an 8-year-old. "Your daughter," she said. "Lily." Something changed in his face when he said the name. Not dramatic, just a small settling, like a weight he carried shifted into a more comfortable position. "She'll be asleep by now. She won't even know you're there until morning." "And then what?" "And then morning," he said. "We figure out the next thing." She didn't have a better option. She knew that. She was also aware that she was sitting in a diner with a stranger making a series of decisions that her usual self, the Victoria, who ran quarterly strategy sessions and made 18-month plans, would have found deeply uncomfortable. But her usual self hadn't been in a parking garage an hour ago with her back against a car door, so her usual self could wait. "Okay," she said. "Thank you." He nodded once, drank his coffee. Outside, it had started to snow. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building on Halsted that had good bones and not much else. The hallway smelled like someone had been cooking something with a lot of garlic. The elevator had an out-of-order sign that looked like it had been there a while, and the stairwell light on the 2nd floor was out. Ethan didn't apologize for any of it. He just navigated it the way he navigated everything, which was quietly and without announcement. The apartment itself was small but not cramped, which was a distinction Victoria hadn't thought much about until she was standing in it. The kitchen was clean. The living room had a couch and a bookshelf and a small television and a drawing taped to the wall near the window. A crayon horse, orange, with what appeared to be a rainbow coming out of its head. Lily's, obviously. There were no pictures of anyone except Lily. On the fridge, on the shelf, in a small frame on the end table. Lily at what looked like a beach, squinting into the sun. Lily holding an enormous stuffed bear. Lily asleep in the back seat of a car with her mouth open and her sneakers untied. No woman in any of them. No family holidays, no couples, no visible past beyond the child. Ethan pulled a blanket and a pillow from the hall closet and put them on the couch. He got her a glass of water without asking if she wanted one. Then he stood in the kitchen doorway with his arms crossed loosely over his chest and looked like he was trying to think of what else needed doing. "There's a spare toothbrush under the sink," he said, "still in the package, and I can—" He stopped. "I don't know if I have anything that would fit you, for sleeping. I'll manage." "Okay." He looked at the hallway toward the bedroom. She sleeps through pretty much everything, but if she gets up in the night, she knows not to bother anyone on the couch. It's happened before. He hadn't finished the sentence, and he didn't finish it. Victoria didn't ask. "Ethan," she said. He looked at her. "Thank you. I mean it." He seemed slightly uncomfortable with the directness of it. "Get some sleep," he said. "You look like you're about to crash." She was. The adrenaline had been burning off for the past hour, and what it left behind was a bone-level exhaustion that she recognized from other bad stretches. The near bankruptcy, the litigation in 2021, the period after her father died when she'd kept the company running on bad sleep and worse coffee for 6 weeks straight. She lay down on the couch with the blanket pulled up and listened to the apartment settle around her. The hiss of the radiator, a car alarm somewhere outside that went for 30 seconds and stopped, the creak of floorboards in the bedroom where Ethan was moving around. She should have been planning, making lists, running through what she knew about Damien's network and who she could call and what evidence she had and how long it would take Marcus to secure what they'd already gathered. That was what she normally would have been doing. Instead, she fell asleep in about 4 minutes. She woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of a child explaining something at length and with considerable authority. Because the rule is that if you don't have an even number of pancakes, then somebody always gets more than the other person. And that's not fair, even if one person isn't hungry, because what if they get hungry later and there aren't any left? Lily. I'm just saying, I know what you're saying. Keep your voice down. I am keeping my voice down. Quieter than that. Victoria sat up. The apartment was gray with morning light. The clock on the microwave said 7:14. She folded the blanket and put it at the end of the couch before she stood up, mostly because it felt rude to leave it in a pile, and then walked to the kitchen doorway. Lily Walker was small for 8, with dark hair that was doing several things at once, and the specific expression of a child who was in the middle of an argument she was absolutely certain she was winning. She was wearing a sweatshirt with a cartoon dinosaur on it, and her socks didn't match. She looked up at Victoria with direct, uncomplicated curiosity. "Hi," she said. "Hi. Are you the lady from the parking garage?" Victoria looked at Ethan, who was at the stove and had the expression of a man who was slightly but not completely surprised that this was happening. "I told her you needed help," he said. "That's all." "Yes," Victoria told Lily. "I'm the lady from the parking garage." Lily considered this. "Dad helps people sometimes," she said, in a tone that was matter-of-fact rather than proud. "He doesn't like to talk about it, but he does it anyway." She climbed back onto her chair and picked up her fork. "Do you want pancakes? There's an uneven number right now, which is a problem." "I would love a pancake," Victoria said. Lily looked satisfied. The problem had been resolved. They didn't talk about what had happened the night before until Lily had gone to school. Ethan walked her 3 blocks to the bus stop and was back in 12 minutes. And then they sat across from each other at the small kitchen table with coffee and the remains of breakfast. And Victoria said, "I need to tell you what's actually going on." "You don't have to," he said. "I know. I want to." She paused. "I want someone else to know, in case something happens to me." He looked at her steadily. "Okay?" She told him everything. The files she'd found, the forensic accountant, the shell companies, the blackmail material, the 46 million that was the visible surface of something much larger. She told him about Damien Cross, how long she'd known him, how much she'd trusted him, how much she'd missed because she hadn't wanted to see it. She told him about the weeks of trying to build a case quietly while he'd been watching her do it. Ethan listened without interrupting. He didn't ask questions while she was talking, which she appreciated. Most people couldn't do that. Most people wanted to insert themselves into information as it arrived, ask clarifying questions, signal that they were following along. Ethan just listened until she was done. When she finished, he turned his coffee mug in a slow circle on the table and was quiet for a moment. "The men last night," he said. "They were his?" "Yes." He confirmed it, through one of them. "So he's done waiting for you to do something?" "Yes." "Then you have less time than you thought." "I know." He was quiet again. Then, "What does your evidence look like right now? What you've already gathered?" She straightened slightly. It was the right question, the operational question, the thing that actually mattered. Enough to damage him seriously, maybe enough to bring charges. But there are gaps, things I couldn't access without tipping him off. Internal communications, server logs, the financial records from the subsidiaries that exist offshore. She paused. And the people he has leverage over. There are board members who know parts of it and haven't said anything because he has material on them. If I go to the authorities with what I have now, he buries the parts I can't prove, uses those board members to question my credibility, and probably walks. Ethan nodded slowly. So I need the full picture, she said, and I have no way to get it without access I don't currently have. And the people who might help me are either compromised or scared. Or both, Ethan said. Or both. He looked at the table for a moment, then he looked at her directly. Tell me about his operation, how he's running it. Not the financial stuff, the structure. Who does what? How the pieces connect. She studied him. Why? Because the financial stuff is your territory. But what you're describing, well, the way he's controlling people, using information, building redundancy so he's never directly exposed, that's a structure. And structures have gaps. Victoria leaned back in her chair. Something had shifted in the quality of his attention. It was still quiet, still calm, but there was a precision to it that hadn't been there when he'd been in the role of reluctant Good Samaritan. He was thinking in a way she recognized, the way she thought when she was solving something. You know how to do this, she said. It wasn't quite a question. He was quiet for a beat too long. Ethan. I know some things, he said, from a long time ago. What kind of things? He picked up his coffee. Set it down without drinking from it. I was in the Navy for a while. How long a while? 13 years. She watched his face. And what did you do in the Navy for 13 years? He looked out the window at the alley behind the building. A pigeon was doing something optimistic near a dumpster. The radiator ticked. Things that are hard to put on a resume, he said. She thought about the parking garage, the speed of it, the economy. The fact that he'd put down the grocery bags gently before moving, which had struck her as strange and now struck her as something else. The reflex of someone who'd learned to keep his hands free without making it obvious. The way he'd scanned the street afterward. The way he'd moved her through the crowd. Seal, she said. He didn't confirm it. He didn't deny it. You don't have to tell me, she said, but it would help me understand what I'm working with. Something in his jaw moved. Not quite a reaction, just a small tension that arrived and then left. 11 years as an operator, 2 more in a role I can't talk about in detail. I left 6 years ago. He paused. After a mission went wrong. He said it the way people said things they'd said so many times the words had worn smooth, accurately, without particular emotion, because all the emotion had already been felt and set down somewhere it couldn't be looked at too directly. I'm sorry, Victoria said. It was a long time ago. That doesn't matter. He looked at her. Something passed across his face, surprise maybe, that she hadn't let the deflection land the way it was meant to. No, he said quietly. It doesn't. They sat with that for a moment. Then Victoria said, Will you help me? I'm already helping you. I mean beyond last night, beyond the couch. She kept her eyes on him. What Damien has built, it's not something I can take apart with lawyers and board meetings. He's been anticipating that. He's been preparing for that for years. But if there's another way to get at it, there are risks, Ethan said. I know. To you. And if things go badly, to people around me. He said it without looking away from her. She understood what he was saying. Lily. He was talking about Lily. I know, she said again. And if you say no, I understand it completely. You have more to lose than I do. He looked down at the table. He was silent long enough that she thought he was going to say no. She was preparing herself for it, figuring out where she went from here, who else she could trust, what the next move looked like alone. There's a man named Roy Castillo, Ethan said. He used to work corporate security. He's good, he's quiet, and he owes me something he's been meaning to repay for about 4 years. He looked up at her. I'll call him today. Victoria released a breath she hadn't fully realized she was holding. Okay. And I need everything you have on Cross. Every file, every transaction, every name. I need to map it out. I can get it to you? And Victoria. He waited until she was looking at him. If this goes the way I think it might go, it's not going to be clean. It's not going to be quiet. And there's going to be a point where you have to trust me to do something without me explaining all of it first. He held her gaze. Can you do that? She thought about her company, her name, 11 years of building something she believed in, now being used as cover for something she would never have agreed to. She thought about the men in the garage and the cracked phone screen and Marcus Webb's voice on the telephone saying all of them. She thought about Lily, explaining the mathematics of pancake fairness with absolute confidence at 7 in the morning. Yes, she said. Ethan nodded. He stood up and started clearing the breakfast plates, methodically, without hurry, the way a man moved when he'd learned that the space between one hard thing and the next was where you did the ordinary work and kept yourself level. Victoria watched him for a moment and then pulled out the spare phone Marcus had told her was waiting for her at a drop location 2 miles away. She needed to get to it. She needed to start moving. Outside, the snow from the night before had settled on the window ledge in a thin, uneven line, already starting to melt at the edges where the sun had found it. The city was waking up around them. Traffic building, voices in the hallway, somewhere below them a door opening and closing. They had work to do. And for the first time since she'd found that file 3 weeks ago, Victoria Hale did not feel like she was doing it alone. That should have been a comfort. Mostly it was. But a small part of her, the part that had been running a company since she was 22, and had learned early that depending on other people meant being let down by them eventually, that part was already waiting to see when the thing she'd put her trust in would turn out to be something other than what it appeared. She looked at Ethan's back as he stood at the sink, thought about the grocery bags on the garage floor, the pancakes, the way he'd said Lily's name. Then she put the thought down and got to work. Roy Castillo showed up that afternoon in a gray Subaru that had at least one working taillight and the look of a vehicle that had been chosen specifically to be unnoticeable. He was 51, compact, with the kind of face that didn't give information away freely and dark eyes that moved across a room the way Ethan's did. Not nervously, just thoroughly. He shook Victoria's hand once, briefly, and then looked at Ethan with something that was almost a smile. "You said you'd never call," Roy said. "I said I'd try not to." "Close enough." Roy sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out a small notebook, paper, not a phone, and clicked a pen. He looked at Victoria. "Tell me what we're dealing with." She told him. He wrote things down in handwriting she couldn't quite read from across the table. He didn't react to anything. Not the 46 million, not the blackmail, not the revelation that her entire security team had been turned. He just wrote and occasionally asked short, specific questions. What's the subsidiary name? How many board members? Which law firm handles his personal affairs? When she finished, he looked at his notes for a moment. His digital footprint, Roy said. Does he use company servers for personal communication, or does he have a separate system? Separate. I found 2 email addresses that don't appear on any company paperwork. Good. That means he thinks he's segmented. Roy tapped the notebook. People who think they're segmented get sloppy. They stop being careful about the edges. He looked at Ethan. There's a woman in Pilsen who does forensic recovery. She's not cheap and she doesn't like meeting new people, but she's the best I've ever worked with. Can you get to her? Probably. She owes me less than you owe me, but enough. Roy looked at Victoria. The board members he has leverage over. Do you have names? 3, possibly 4. I need the names. She hesitated. Not because she didn't trust him, she'd trusted Ethan on less, but because speaking the names felt like something she couldn't take back. Once Roy Castillo had those names, this had moved from a decision she was making to a thing that was already in motion. She gave him the names. He wrote them down, didn't look up. One more question, Roy said, and answer it honestly because it changes what we do next. He put the pen down and looked at her directly. How far do you want to go with this? Do you want to hurt him legally, or do you want to take apart everything he's built? Victoria didn't hesitate. Everything. Roy picked the pen back up. Okay, he said, then we start tonight. Ethan, standing in the kitchen doorway with his arms crossed, said nothing, but she caught the look that passed between the two of them, brief, almost imperceptible, the particular communication of people who had operated together in situations where talking cost time they didn't have. She didn't know what it meant exactly, but it meant something. Later, after Roy had left with his paper notebook and his list of names and the photographs she'd taken of the key transactions, Ethan's phone buzzed on the counter. He picked it up, read the screen, and for just a second the set of his face changed in a way that Victoria had not seen yet. Not worry. Something underneath worry. Something more primary than that. Lily? She asked. School called, he said. She's fine. She just got in a disagreement with another kid about something. He set the phone down. She's fine, he said again, more to himself than to her. Victoria said nothing. She watched him stand there for a moment with his hand still on the phone, and she understood, clearly, and without needing it explained, what the actual geometry of this situation was. It wasn't her company, her reputation, or Damien Cross that governed what happened here. It was that small girl on a school bus with mismatched socks and strong opinions about pancake fairness. That was the thing Ethan Walker was protecting. Everything else was secondary. She would need to remember that. She would need to make sure that whatever she asked of him, she never lost sight of it. Roy Castillo had a rule about information. You never went looking for more than you needed, because more than you needed meant more exposure, more risk, and more ways for a careful plan to come apart at a joint you hadn't reinforced. He'd explained this to Ethan years ago, in a different context entirely, and Ethan had agreed with it then and still agreed with it now. The problem was that what they needed, in this case, turned out to be a very large amount. 3 days after Roy's first visit to the apartment on Halstead, he came back with his notebook filled to the last page and a look on his face that Ethan recognized from a handful of situations in the past. The expression of a man who had gone looking for something manageable and found instead something with much deeper roots than the surface suggested. He spread 6 printed pages across the kitchen table without preamble. Damien Cross has been building this for 14 years, Roy said. Not 11, 14. He started 2 years before Victoria brought him on. Victoria was standing at the counter with her coffee. She set it down. That's not possible. I did background checks. My predecessor did background checks. Your background checks found what he wanted them to find. Roy tapped the first page. He had a consulting firm that looked legitimate. 3 clients, all real companies, all paying real invoices. What those invoices were actually for is a different question. He looked at her. 2 of those 3 companies had regulatory problems that disappeared quietly around the same time they became his clients. One of them had an executive who was arrested for wire fraud and then wasn't. Witnesses recanted, Ethan said. He'd read the pages before Roy arrived. Witnesses recanted, Roy confirmed. Damien Cross has been doing this since he was 38 years old. He walked into your company already knowing how to do it, already knowing how to stay invisible, and he spent 11 years using your infrastructure to make his operation bigger. He looked at Victoria steadily. He didn't corrupt your company. He used it as a platform. The kitchen was quiet for a moment. Outside, a delivery truck was backing up, the beeping small and rhythmic and indifferent to the conversation happening 3 floors above the street. Victoria picked up her coffee again. She didn't drink from it. How many people? Inside Hale Technologies? We've confirmed 7 employees actively involved. Probably 2 more we haven't confirmed yet. Roy turned a page. Outside, his network of contacts, people who have obligations to him, people who are afraid of him, that's larger. We're still mapping it. We need to move faster, Victoria said. Every day I'm not in that building, he's consolidating. He's going to push for an emergency board session and try to have me removed for cause. He's already tried, Roy said. Day before yesterday. 2 board members blocked it, the ones he doesn't have leverage over. He paused. He'll try again. And the second time he'll have something to use against the ones who blocked it. Ethan had been quiet through most of this. He was leaning against the wall near the window with his arms crossed, looking at the pages on the table. The server logs, he said. Where are we on the server logs? Diane is working on it. Roy meant the woman in Pilsen, Diane Voss, who did forensic data recovery out of a second-floor office above a dry cleaner and communicated almost entirely through encrypted messages, and the occasional handwritten note slid under Roy's car door. She says 48 hours. She's found 2 of the offshore accounts already. The transactions are there. She just needs the thread that connects them to him personally, not just to the subsidiaries. What does she need for that? An internal access code, something that was generated on his workstation. Victoria straightened. I can get that. Both men looked at her. I still have a key to the building, she said, and my biometric access hasn't been revoked yet because the board hasn't formally suspended me. He can't do that without a formal vote, and the vote hasn't happened. She paused. If I go in after hours... No, Ethan said. Ethan, he's going to have the building watched. If not physically, then through the system. The moment your credentials register anywhere in that network, he'll know. Not if I access a terminal that isn't connected to the main logging system. She looked at him. There's a server room on the 14th floor that was taken offline 2 years ago when we upgraded infrastructure. It's still physically there. The hardware still works. And it was never migrated to the new logging architecture because we kept it as a backup. She put her coffee down. Damien doesn't know about it. It predates him. Roy looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Roy. How sure are you that it predates him? Ethan asked. Completely. It was installed when the building was first leased 12 years ago, before I brought him on. And it's never appeared in any audit he's had access to because it runs on a separate power circuit and it was categorized as decommissioned in the infrastructure notes. She paused. I built that company from the ground up. There are things in it that only I know. Roy wrote something in his notebook. If she can access from that terminal without triggering the main system, Diane can work with whatever she pulls. It doesn't need to be much, just the thread. One log in, Victoria said. 15 minutes. Ethan looked at the window, at the street below. He was running the geometry of it, the building layout, the access points, the coverage patterns, the variables that could go wrong between a car door closing and a person being back on the street. He did this the way other people did math, without seeming to try. Not alone, he said. Obviously, Victoria said. Oh. They went in on a Thursday night at 11:40, when the building's cleaning crew had already finished the lower floors and the skeleton security staff. 2 guards, one on the lobby desk, one doing rounds on a schedule Roy had mapped over the preceding 40 hours, was in its most predictable configuration. Roy stayed outside in the gray Subaru with a clear line of sight to both street-facing entrances and a radio that worked on a frequency nobody was scanning. Ethan and Victoria went in through a loading dock entrance on the building's south side that used a mechanical key rather than a card reader. Old infrastructure, never upgraded, the kind of thing that got overlooked in the gap between construction and occupancy. Victoria had the key. She'd had it since the building was leased and had never thrown it away for reasons she couldn't now specifically remember, which struck her, standing at the dock door in the cold, as the kind of luck that felt like it should have a name. The 14th floor was dark and smelled like a room that hadn't had people in it long enough to stop smelling like machinery and recycled air. The server equipment sat in 2 racks along the far wall, dormant but intact. Victoria navigated by the glow of Ethan's small flashlight. He held it low, pointed at the floor, and found the access terminal in under 2 minutes. She'd been worried the credentials would be expired. They weren't. The system was frozen in time, the way decommissioned things often were, still valid, just unvisited, like a library book that had never been checked out and was therefore still precisely where it had been shelved years ago. Ethan stood near the door and watched the corridor while she worked. He didn't pace. He didn't check his phone. He stood the way she had noticed he always stood in situations with any degree of risk, weight slightly forward, shoulders loose, the stillness of someone who had learned that moving when you didn't need to was a liability. She found the file structure she needed in 11 minutes, pulled the relevant access records to a drive the size of her thumb, logged out clean. Done, she said. Good. He moved away from the door. We take the stairs down to 8, then cross to the east stairwell. The guard's round brings him to 14 in about 6 minutes. She didn't ask how he knew that. She had learned over the past several days that Ethan Walker had done his thinking before the moment arrived. By the time something was happening, he'd already been through it 2 or 3 times in his head and decided what the correct response was. It was efficient. It was also, she suspected, a thing that had cost him something over the years. The constant low-level expenditure of living one step ahead of what was in front of you. They were back in the Subaru in 9 minutes and 40 seconds from the moment the loading dock door had closed behind them. Roy pulled into traffic without comment. Diane Voss had the access code threaded and connected to Damien Cross's personal login within 36 hours. What she found, once she had that thread to pull, was substantially worse than what they'd already known. She sent Roy a single encrypted message that said, "You need to come see this in person." They went to the office above the dry cleaner the next morning. Roy, Ethan, and Victoria, which Diane acknowledged with a look that suggested she found having 3 visitors at once unreasonable, but had decided to manage it. Her office was not what Victoria had expected. It was organized in a way that looked chaotic, but clearly wasn't. Stacked drives labeled in a code only Diane used, 3 monitors running simultaneously, a small space heater under the desk, even though the room wasn't particularly cold. Diane was 55, wore her gray hair short, and spoke in the specific rhythm of someone who spent most of their time with systems rather than people, direct, slightly impatient with anything that wasn't the information itself. 14 shell companies, she said, pulling up a flowchart on the center monitor. 7 offshore. The money moves in a pattern that's designed to look like normal business latency. The delays are calibrated to match legitimate transaction times so automated monitoring won't flag it. Whoever designed this structure understood banking compliance intimately. She looked at Victoria. He had help from inside the financial system, probably someone in a mid-level compliance role who knew exactly where the gaps were. Can you identify them? Roy asked. Already have. There's a name on the receiving end of a payment that predates his time at Hale by 3 years. It connects to a regulatory analyst who left the Federal Reserve in 2015 under circumstances that were described at the time as voluntary. Diane printed a page and slid it across the desk without looking up. The blackmail material is on a separate encrypted partition. I've cracked part of it. The room was quiet. How bad? Ethan asked. Diane looked at him. Bad enough that at least 2 of the people in his files would do most things to keep it from coming out. She paused. Including things they haven't done yet. Victoria looked at the flowchart. 14 shells. 14 years. The patient, architectural patience of it. The way it had been built to survive scrutiny, to absorb questions and redirect them, to present a different face depending on who was looking. Damian Cross had not built this out of greed alone. Greed didn't produce this kind of precision. This was something else. This was the work of someone who needed, above everything, to be untouchable. He's afraid of something, she said. Roy looked at her. What? People who build structures this elaborate. It's not just about money. They're afraid of what happens if they lose. Really afraid. She looked at the monitor. Which means there's something underneath this that he's protecting beyond the obvious. Diane said, There's a folder in the partition I haven't fully opened, encrypted with a different key than the rest of the blackmail material. Separate architecture. Whatever's in it, he treats it differently than everything else. Can you open it? Victoria asked. Given enough time, but if I push it too fast and trip the wrong protocol, it auto-deletes. Diane looked at her with the specific patience of someone explaining a technical constraint to a non-technical person for the second time. 48 hours minimum, done correctly. Victoria nodded. Then we wait. On the way out, down the narrow staircase that smelled like dry cleaning chemicals and old wood, Ethan said quietly, You were right. About which part? Damien being afraid. He pushed the door open onto the street. Cold air came in sharp. Afraid people are more dangerous than greedy ones. Greedy people will take what they can get and leave when the cost gets too high. Afraid people don't know when to stop. She looked at him. You sound like you know the type. He was quiet for a second. I've met a few. They had been operating out of the apartment for 6 days when Lily figured out that whatever was happening was more serious than her father had told her. She was 8, not 5. She noticed the second phone on the kitchen counter that her father answered in a different voice than his regular one. She noticed that the lady from the parking garage, Victoria, had been there every day and sometimes was still there when Lily went to bed. She noticed that her father, who slept lightly on a good night, was barely sleeping at all. She said nothing about any of this for 3 days. Then, on a Wednesday evening when Victoria was at the table going through documents and Ethan was on the phone in the hallway, Lily climbed onto the chair across from Victoria and put her chin in her hands. Are you in trouble? She asked. Victoria looked up. Lily was watching her with the direct, undecorated attention of a child who hadn't yet learned to make her curiosity less obvious. Some, Victoria said. Is my dad helping you with it? Yes. Lily considered this. He's good at helping with trouble. He doesn't like to do it, but he's good at it. She paused. He used to have bad dreams. After he left the Navy. He doesn't as much anymore, but sometimes he still does. Victoria set her pen down. Does he know you know that? Probably. He doesn't talk about it, so I don't talk about it. Lily picked up one of the pens from the table and turned it in her fingers. I just wanted to know if you were going to be okay. Because he worries about people and then he doesn't sleep. And if he doesn't sleep, he gets that face. What face? Lily made a face. Jaw slightly tight, eyes a little too focused on nothing. And it was so accurate that Victoria almost laughed before she caught herself. I see that face, Victoria said. It means he's thinking about bad stuff. He tries not to show it. Lily set the pen down carefully. He's not very good at hiding things from me, but I let him think he is. Victoria looked at this child for a moment. This small, self-possessed, quietly perceptive person who had apparently appointed herself the primary keeper of her father's emotional state and had been doing it with considerable competence for some time. We're going to be okay, Victoria said. I mean it. Your dad is very good at what he's doing. I know, Lily said simply. I just wanted to hear someone else say it. She climbed down from the chair and went to the living room and turned on the television at a volume her father had calibrated as acceptable, and that was the end of it. When Ethan came back in and saw Victoria's expression, he stopped. What? Nothing, Victoria said. Your daughter is something else. He looked toward the living room. The particular softness that arrived on his face when Lily was the subject was something that had no calculation in it. It was just there, unguarded, the one place in him where the controlled stillness opened up without resistance. Yeah, he said. She is. The news broke on a Friday. Not the news they wanted. Not the full exposure of Damien's network. Not the financial records and the blackmail files and the offshore accounts laid out for federal investigators. The news that broke was the news Damien made. Victoria's face appeared on 3 major financial news sites within the span of an hour. Anonymous sources inside Hale Technologies were alleging financial misconduct by the CEO. The word fraud appeared in 2 of the headlines. A board member, one of the ones with material in Damien's encrypted files, Victoria recognized the name immediately, had given a statement suggesting Victoria had been removed from day-to-day operations pending an internal investigation. She stared at her phone and felt something cold move through her that was not quite anger and not quite fear. It was more the sensation of watching a very specific kind of damage being done. The kind that didn't announce itself as violence but worked like it. He's burning the field, she said, before we can use what we found. Ethan, who had been reading the same news on the spare phone, set it down. His voice was level. Can Marcus hold what you've gathered? Yes, it's off-site. He's the only one who knows where. Then the evidence is still intact. The evidence doesn't matter if I'm the story. She stood up from the table and walked to the window. 2 floors below, a man was walking a dog that was pulling extremely hard towards something in the gutter. Normal. Completely normal. Somewhere across the city, her company was being used as a stage, and she was being cast as the villain, and she wasn't there to say a word. If he controls the narrative for the next 2 weeks, it doesn't matter what we have. By the time we get it in front of the right people, there will be enough doubt planted that it looks like a dispute between 2 executives rather than one person systematically looting. Victoria. Ethan's voice was quiet. She turned. He was looking at her without urgency. He moved because we found something. He's not doing this from a position of strength. He's doing it because he knows you're close, and he's trying to change the shape of the problem. She looked at him. Don't let him change the shape, Ethan said. She took a breath. Let it out. The man with the dog outside had given up on controlling the animal and was now just walking at a slight diagonal, being towed. She watched it for a second, and some of the tightness in her chest loosened very slightly. Diane needs more time for the last partition, she said. She'll get it. And I need someone to talk to the board members who aren't compromised, before Damien gets to them with whatever story he's feeding the media. Roy can arrange that. Neutral location. No phones. She nodded. Then, there's another thing. She turned from the window. The board member who gave that statement, Sandra Kemp. I know her. I've known her for 6 years. She came to my mother's funeral. Victoria's voice stayed even, but something moved under the surface of it. He has something on her. Whatever he has on her is significant enough that she'll do this. Ethan didn't offer her a reassurance. He just acknowledged it with his eyes, which was the right response. Better than a platitude, better than a reframe. Just acknowledgement that it was a real thing and it had real weight. That happens sometimes, he said. People you trust. It's not a reflection of your judgment. It's a reflection of how much pressure he can apply. That doesn't make it easier. No, he said. It doesn't. She nodded once. She was going to carry that one for a while, she knew. Sandra Kemp's face and her mother's funeral and the strange, specific betrayal of watching someone you thought you knew become unrecognizable under sufficient pressure. That was the part of this that the financial records and the offshore accounts didn't capture. The personal cost of it, the quiet erosion of the world as she'd thought she understood it. But that was later. Right now, there was work. Diane cracked the final partition on Saturday afternoon. She sent Roy the single word, "Come." What was inside the folder was not what any of them had expected. It was not additional blackmail material. It was not more financial records. It was a series of communications, going back 9 years, between Damien Cross and a government official whose name Victoria did not recognize but whose position she did, a mid-level procurement officer in a federal defense agency. The communications detailed a long-running arrangement. Damien had been brokering access to Hale Technologies' software infrastructure for a foreign-owned holding company that had, buried underneath 3 layers of corporate structure, connections to an intelligence apparatus that the United States government would have found extremely interesting. Diane laid this out with the same flat precision she used for everything. Roy listened without his face changing. Victoria sat very still. Ethan, who was standing near the door, said nothing for a long moment after Diane finished. Then he said, "That's not corporate fraud." "No," Roy said, "it's not. That's a federal matter, different agencies." "Yes." Ethan looked at Victoria. She was processing it. She could see the calculations running behind her eyes. The rapid reassessment of what this changed, what it meant, how it altered the shape of the problem she'd been trying to solve. "He wasn't just protecting his money," she said slowly. "He was protecting this. The financial crimes, they're real, but they're also cover. They're the thing he expects people to find if someone starts looking, the thing that absorbs the investigation." She looked at Diane's monitor. "This is what he actually can't afford to have found, which is why it was in a separate partition," Diane said, "with a different encryption key and a self-delete protocol." She looked at them with something that was not quite satisfaction, but was in the neighborhood of it. He built the outer layer to be discoverable. This was never meant to be found. Roy looked at Ethan. A lot passed between them in a short space of time. "We need to be careful about who we take this to," Ethan said. "If we go through normal channels and the wrong person gets a look at it first." "He has contacts in those channels," Roy said. "We have to assume he does. So we go around." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "There's someone I know, former colleague. She moved into federal law enforcement after I left. She's not someone Damien's network would have had reason to touch. She's not senior enough to have been on his radar, but she has access to the people who need to see this." Victoria looked at him. "You trust her?" He thought about it honestly, which she had come to understand was a thing he always did. He didn't offer automatic reassurance. He actually evaluated the question. "Yes," he said. "She's difficult, and she's not going to like being called like this, but yes." "Then call her." He pulled out his phone and walked to the window. Victoria watched him dial a number from memory, no contacts list, straight from his head, and stand there looking at the street while it rang. When someone picked up, he said, "It's Ethan Walker. I know. I need 40 minutes of your time." A pause. "In person. Tonight if possible." Another pause, longer. "I understand, but Sarah, this is something you need to see." His voice on her name was different from the careful neutrality he used for most things. Not warm exactly, but specific. The voice of someone calling a person who mattered and who he hadn't called in too long and who was probably right to be annoyed about that. He listened, said, "Thank you," and hung up. "Tonight," he told the room. 8 o'clock. Victoria let out a breath. Around them, Diane had already turned back to her monitors, disinterested in the human logistics that followed from information she had provided. The space heater under the desk ticked. One of the monitors cycled through what looked like a cascade of decrypting data, patient and unhurried. Outside, Saturday afternoon was moving into Saturday evening, the light going flat and gray over the city, the kind of sky that couldn't decide between clouds and clarity and had settled on both at once. Roy closed his notebook and put it in his jacket pocket. He looked at Victoria. "When this goes federal," he said, "it moves fast, and it moves in ways you can't control. You understand that?" "Yes." "Whatever happens to your company after this, it might not look the way you expect." "I know." She looked at the monitor with the flowchart on it. 14 shells. 14 years. A man who had understood before he walked through her door exactly how to use the thing she'd built against her. As long as it's the truth, she said, whatever it looks like. As long as it's the truth coming out. Roy nodded once. It was the nod of a man who had seen a lot of situations and had learned that the ones with a clear North Star, even a costly one, tended to go better than the ones where people were navigating by something murkier. Ethan's phone buzzed on the windowsill. He picked it up, read the screen, and held it out to her. It was a text from a number she didn't recognize. 3 words, no context. She's still alive? Someone in Damien's network was running a confirmation check. They didn't know where she was, which meant they were still looking, which meant the answer they had so far was no, and they were trying to change that. She looked up at Ethan. "He's not done," she said. "I know." Ethan set the phone down. His expression was the same it had been in the parking garage when she'd first seen it, that particular, unhurried focus. "Neither are we." Sarah Okafor was 43 years old and had the specific energy of someone who had been doing difficult work for a long time without much acknowledgement and had made a private peace with that fact. She was a senior investigator with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, which meant she spent most of her professional life looking at paper trails that other people had gone to considerable effort to make illegible. She was good at it. She was also, as Ethan had warned, not particularly happy about receiving a call from a number she hadn't heard from in 4 years on a Saturday evening with a request to meet the same night. She picked the location herself, a bar near Wicker Park that she apparently knew well enough to have a usual table, which was in the back corner and had a clear line of sight to both the entrance and the emergency exit. Ethan noted this without commenting on it. Old habits. Some people never fully stopped. She arrived 7 minutes after they did, clocked the table configuration in one pass, and sat down across from Ethan with the expression of a woman who was reserving judgment, but not by a wide margin. "You look tired," she said to him. "I'm fine." "I didn't ask if you were fine. I said you look tired." She looked at Victoria. "You're the CEO. Hale Technologies. I've been watching your name on the news feeds for the past 2 days." Sarah's voice was neutral, the kind of neutral that was a professional tool rather than an absence of opinion. "Someone is working very hard to make you look like a criminal." "Someone has been working very hard on a lot of things for a long time," Victoria said. "We have documentation of most of it. That's why we called you." Sarah looked at Ethan. "She always this direct?" "Yes," Ethan said. "It's useful." "I imagine." Sarah leaned back. The bar noise moved around them. Not loud enough to obscure conversation, just loud enough to absorb it. "All right, show me what you have." Roy had prepared a compressed version. The essential documents, the flowchart, the offshore accounts, the thread Diane had pulled from the access logs, and the final partition. Not everything. Enough. Sarah went through it with a small flashlight she produced from her jacket pocket, reading each page the way people who worked with documents read them. Not absorbing narrative, but scanning for structure, dates, names, the connective tissue between things. She was quiet for a long time. When she looked up, her face had changed in a way that was subtle but legible if you knew what you were looking for. The government official in these communications. You understand what this means in terms of jurisdiction. "It crosses into national security territory," Ethan said. "It crosses into national security territory in a way that is going to make my supervisor's head come off his body," Sarah said. "Yes." She looked at the last page again. "The foreign holding company. Do you have a full corporate lineage?" "Diane can pull it." 48 hours. "Who's Diane?" "Someone very good who doesn't like meeting new people," Roy said. Sarah looked at him for a moment, looked back at Ethan. "Your people haven't changed." "Some things don't," he said. She put the documents back in the folder with the careful precision of someone who understood that what she was holding was both valuable and dangerous. "I need to take this through a specific channel, not my direct supervisor, someone 2 levels above him who I trust, and who has the clearance to move on the national security component without it getting intercepted by someone in Cross's network." She looked at Victoria. "That process takes time. It can't be rushed without creating exposure." "How much time?" Victoria asked. "Realistically, to do it correctly, 72 hours before the right people have seen it and can authorize action." Victoria was quiet. 72 hours. 3 days. Damien had been moving fast since the media story broke. The board session he'd been pushing for was scheduled for Tuesday, 2 days from now, and if he got the votes he needed, he could formally remove her, install a compliant interim CEO, and begin making documents disappear from the inside. Tuesday, Victoria said. He's trying to push through a board vote to remove me on Tuesday. Sarah looked at her directly. That's a corporate matter. I can't stop a board vote. I know. But if the board votes Tuesday and he consolidates control of the building before your people have moved, the evidence doesn't live in the building, Sarah said. You have copies. The evidence doesn't, but the people do. The 7 employees who are active in his network. Once he controls the company, he controls what they say and what they don't say. He controls access to the servers. He controls the physical infrastructure. Victoria leaned forward slightly. I need the board to delay that vote, and the only way they delay it is if they understand what's actually at stake. Sarah considered this. I can't make any official contact before the channel is established. That's not something I can move on. She paused. But I'm not the only one in this room. She looked at Roy. Roy looked back at her with the expression of a man who had just been handed a task he already knew was coming. The board members who haven't been compromised, Sarah said. A private communication. Not from me. Not from anyone connected to a federal investigation. Just from someone who wants them to understand that a delay is in everyone's interest. She picked up her drink. I have no knowledge of that conversation. It doesn't exist. Roy made a small sound that was not quite agreement and not quite objection. He picked up his own drink. I'll need a secure way to document the communication afterward for the record, once your channel opens. You'll have it, Sarah said. Ethan had been watching this exchange with the look of someone watching 2 experienced people negotiate a tight space without bumping into each other. He said, Cross sent a confirmation text to a number we flagged. He's still trying to locate Victoria. Sarah's eyes moved to him. How close? Close enough that the text came through. Not close enough that he has her. He paused. But his people are going to keep looking, and the media story gives them cover. Anyone looking for a fugitive CEO looks like due diligence right now. Then she needs to stay off the grid for another 3 days. Sarah said it simply, like it was a logistical detail rather than a significant imposition on a person's life. I know, Victoria said. 3 days, Sarah said. And then this moves very fast and you need to be ready for that. When federal action starts on something like this, it doesn't stop and it doesn't accommodate schedules. I understand. Sarah looked at her for a moment. Something softened almost imperceptibly. Not sympathy exactly, more like a kind of recognition. He picked you specifically, she said. Cross. He didn't accidentally end up at your company. He chose it. I know, Victoria said. That means he watched you long enough to decide you were the right vehicle, which means he knew you were capable enough to build something worth using. She finished her drink and set the glass down. I've been doing this for 16 years. The people who get used by operators like Cross are almost never the weak ones. She gathered her coat and stood, looked at Ethan one more time with something that moved briefly across her face. Not quite warmth, but the compressed memory of it. Don't wait 4 years next time. I'll try, he said. She left. The bar noise settled back into the space she'd vacated. Roy was already writing in his notebook. The next day was Sunday, and it was the day Ethan's phone rang at 6:47 in the morning with a number he didn't recognize, and the voice on the other end said, We have your daughter. Don't call the police. Don't call anyone. We'll be in touch with instructions. The line went dead. Victoria was on the couch when it happened. She heard the call, but not the words. What she heard was the silence that followed it, a silence that had a different quality than any other silence she'd experienced in the 12 days she'd known Ethan Walker. She sat up. He was standing in the kitchen doorway with the phone held loosely at his side, and his face had gone somewhere she'd never seen it go. Not blank, not controlled. Just very still, like everything inside him had stopped moving and was waiting for instructions from a different part of his brain. Ethan. She was on her feet. He looked at her. His eyes were present. She could see that. He hadn't gone anywhere. He was still fully there. But something in the fundamental architecture of the man had shifted in a way that she understood, watching it happen, was not reversible. Whatever Ethan Walker had kept himself from being for the past 6 years had just been given a reason to come back. They took Lily, he said. The words landed in the room and stayed there. Victoria said nothing for 2 full seconds. Then, when? The call just came. He looked at the phone in his hand. She goes to school early on Sundays for a music program. I was going to walk her to the stop. He stopped, looked at the window. I was going to walk her to the stop. I got a message this morning saying Roy needed a call back and I was on the phone for 11 minutes and… Stop! Victoria moved into the kitchen. Her voice was steady and low, and she made it that way deliberately, because one of them needed to be, and she could see that he was already doing what people did when the thing they were most afraid of arrived, running the timeline backward, looking for the moment they could have changed it. This is not something you caused. He was watching us and he moved when he had an opening. That's on him. Ethan looked at her. His jaw was tight. Do you hear me? She said. Yes. He said it quietly. I hear you. Okay. She reached for her phone. We call Roy, right now. He said don't call anyone. I know what he said. She met Ethan's eyes. You told me there would be moments where I had to trust you without a full explanation. I'm asking you to do the same thing right now. Roy can move without triggering anything they're monitoring. He knows how to do this. Ethan was quiet for 3 seconds that felt substantially longer. Then he nodded. Roy picked up on the first ring. Ethan told him in 9 words. They have Lily. Took her this morning. Music program. Roy asked 2 questions. What stop, what time she left, and said he'd call back in 10 minutes. He called back in 7. Bus stop camera on Paulina caught it, Roy said. Gray van, no plates. 2 men. She got in the van. She didn't fight it, which means they said something to her that made her comply. Someone she might recognize, or they mentioned you. A pause. The van went south on Ashland. I lost it at the intersection where the camera coverage drops. Ethan was at the table with a piece of paper, writing. The coverage drops for 4 blocks on Ashland south of Archer. If they knew that, they knew the camera grid, Roy said. This was planned. How long ago? At least 48 hours of surveillance to map that route. They've been watching the apartment. Roy's voice was careful, controlled. Ethan. They didn't take her to hurt her. They took her to stop you. I know. Which means she's safe as long as they believe they need her for leverage. I know, Roy. A pause. What do you need? Ethan looked at the paper in front of him. He'd written a set of names and locations, places Damian Cross's network used, that they'd identified over the past week through Diane's work and Roy's surveillance. Safe houses, meeting points, properties held under subsidiary names that didn't connect back to Damian directly. There's a warehouse, Ethan said. The one in Bridgeport that Diane found registered to the Third Shell Company. It's the largest physical property in his network with secure interior space and camera coverage. He looked at Victoria across the table. That's where I'd put her. I'll go look at it, Roy said. Give me 2 hours. 1, Ethan said. His voice was different now. Still quiet, but the register had dropped into something that wasn't a request. I need to know in 1 hour. Roy said, 1 hour, and hung up. Victoria sat down across from Ethan. He was looking at the paper, but she could see he wasn't reading it anymore. He was somewhere else. Running scenarios, she recognized that look now, calculating approaches and contingencies and failure points, with the methodical focus of a man whose training was pulling harder on him than anything else in the room. What are you going to do? She asked. Get her back. I know that. I mean, how? He looked up. He seemed to make a decision. I'm going to go in and take her out. If she's in that warehouse, I know the building. The layout is on file through the property records. I've been through worse configurations. He paused. I need it to be quiet. No sirens, no police response that tips them before I'm inside. Just me and Roy on the outside managing the perimeter. And me, Victoria said. He shook his head. Ethan, this is different from the server room. His voice was firm but not unkind. The server room was controlled. This is a live situation with Lily inside it. I cannot be managing what's happening with you at the same time as I'm moving through that building. She wanted to argue. She looked at his face and didn't. Then what do I do? You call Sarah Okafor. He slid his phone across the table. Her number was on the screen. You tell her we need to move today, not in 72 hours. You tell her why. And you give her everything. All of Diane's files, Marcus's copies, all of it. You release it all right now. He looked at her steadily. If Cross is watching and he sees federal investigators moving toward him, he loses the nerve to do anything that makes his situation worse. His instinct will be to cut losses and run, which means Lily becomes a liability he can't afford. Victoria understood. She picked up the phone. "You want me to flush him into the open?" "I want you to do what you do," he said. "I'll do what I do." Roy confirmed the warehouse at 53 minutes. Thermal imaging from a device he didn't explain and Victoria didn't ask about showed 3 heat signatures inside. 2 large, 1 small, all on the second floor. The small one was stationary, seated, not moving erratically, calm, or at least contained. "She's sitting," Roy said, "not restrained in a way that stops movement. They probably told her to stay put." Ethan let out a breath. One specific breath, and then he put it away. "Give me the perimeter layout." Roy walked him through it. 2 exits on the ground floor, 1 external staircase on the north side. 2 men on the second floor, based on the thermal readings, which meant whoever had coordinated the snatch wasn't in the building. They were somewhere else, waiting on a call that Damian Cross was going to make once he'd used Lily to get what he wanted from Ethan. What Damian Cross wanted, they learned 14 minutes later, when the follow-up call came. It was a different number. When Ethan answered, it was Damian's voice. The first time Victoria had heard it in 12 days, the voice she had associated for 11 years with boardrooms and strategy sessions, and the practiced confidence of someone who understood how to hold a room. It sounded different now, or maybe she was just hearing it differently. "Mr. Walker," Damian said, "I understand we haven't been formally introduced. I apologize for the circumstances." Ethan said nothing. "Your daughter is comfortable. She's been given water and something to eat, and she's perfectly safe. That remains true as long as you and Ms. Hale cooperate." A pause. "I want 2 things. The copies of the documents your people have gathered, all of them, delivered to a location I'll specify. And Ms. Hale signs a statement acknowledging that the information she's gathered was obtained illegally and retracts all accusations." Another pause. "You have 4 hours." Ethan's voice was so level it almost didn't sound like a voice. "I need to hear her." A rustling. Then Lily's voice. And whatever Ethan was made of, whatever the 11 years of training and the years of careful, controlled living since had produced, it cracked, visibly, just for a moment, just across the surface, just enough for Victoria to see it. "Dad?" Lily's voice was small but steady, in the way that children's voices were sometimes steady when they were frightened and had decided that being frightened wasn't useful. It was the most heartbreaking kind of steady. "Hey, Bug." His voice was different, warm, with no trace of anything else in it. "You okay?" "I'm okay. They have bad snacks, though." He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Yeah? What kind?" "Plain crackers. No peanut butter or anything. It's very disappointing." "I'll bring you something good when I come get you." "Okay." A pause. "Dad?" "Yeah." "Come fast, okay?" "I'm coming," he said. "I promise." The line switched back to Damian. 4 hours, he said. "Don't make this complicated." He disconnected. Ethan set the phone down on the table. He put both hands flat on the table surface and was still for a moment. Victoria didn't say anything. He straightened. "I'm going to get her," he said. His voice was back, controlled, clear, operational. "Roy's already outside. I need 30 minutes to get there and another 10 to position." He looked at her. "Sarah?" "Already on the phone with her when your call came in." Victoria held up her own phone. "She's moving. She says 2 hours for first response to hit the right locations. 2 hours is enough." He moved to the hall closet. She had wondered, once or twice in the past week, about the black bag on the top shelf, the one he hadn't opened and hadn't explained. He brought it down now and set it on the table and unzipped it with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone accessing a toolbox. "I need you to stay here. Keep working, Sarah. When she's ready to move, you know what to give her and what order to give it in." "I do." He paused, looked at her across the table. He seemed to want to say something and was working out whether to say it. "Ethan, go." "If this goes wrong," he started. "It won't. But if it does, I need you to make sure Lily—" "I will," Victoria said, "but it won't come to that." He held her gaze for a moment. There was something in his eyes that was very human and very raw and very tired, underneath everything else. The look of a man who had been holding himself at a particular level of readiness for too long and was now being asked to hold it a little longer. The look of someone who would do it, who always did it, and who was starting to understand the cost of that in a way that had no clean resolution. Okay, he said. He picked up the bag and walked to the door. Ethan. He turned. She said, "She told me she lets you think you're hiding things from her, so she doesn't have to worry about you worrying." Victoria held his eyes. "Go get her." Something moved through his face. Not quite a smile. Not quite anything with a name. He nodded once and went out the door. Roy had the perimeter mapped with 3 observation points by the time Ethan arrived. They spoke for 4 minutes beside Roy's Subaru half a block from the warehouse, voices low, not because there was anyone near enough to hear, but because the conversation didn't call for anything louder. "North staircase is the cleanest entry," Roy said. "The door at the base has a hasp block, old hardware, not alarmed. Second floor has 1 window on the south end that's been covered from inside, which is where they are. Internal layout based on the filing is open plan warehouse on the first floor, office build-out on the second. Single corridor, 3 rooms. Which room? Middle one based on the thermal. Warmest. Probably the one with a space heater, which means it was set up in advance." Ethan looked at the building. It was an ordinary-looking structure in an industrial block. Gray brick, loading dock sealed with a roll-down gate. Nothing about it that announced what it currently contained. "The 2 men," Ethan said. "Positioning. One outside the door to the middle room, one at the top of the staircase." Roy paused. "They're not military. They're the same type as the men from the garage, hired professionals. Competent but not trained for this specific scenario. Meaning they're expecting a negotiation, not an extraction. Meaning they're expecting you to be on the phone with Damien, not walking in the building." Ethan nodded. He adjusted the strap of the bag on his shoulder. "Keep the line open. If either of those positions changes, I need to know." "Always," Roy said. He put a small earpiece in his left ear and handed an identical one to Ethan. "I'll be here." Ethan looked at this building one more time, and for a moment he wasn't in Chicago at all. He was somewhere older, somewhere louder and darker, and with worse odds than this, standing outside a different structure, with different people waiting inside. The memory arrived without being invited, the way those memories always did, and for a fraction of a second it brought with it the weight of everything that had gone wrong in that other place. The faces of the men who hadn't come out of it. He let it arrive. Let it sit for exactly as long as it needed to. Then he let it go. This was different. Lily was in there. The math was completely different. He moved toward the north staircase. The hasp block took 11 seconds. The door opened without sound. The first floor was exactly what the filing described. Open warehouse space, concrete floor, the industrial smell of old machinery and dust. He moved through it to the interior staircase at the far end, going by the building schematic he'd memorized that morning, each step placed deliberately, no wasted motion. Roy's voice in his ear. "Position 1 is static. Position 2 moved slightly toward the window but came back." He reached the staircase. Went up. The man at the top of the stairs was looking the wrong direction, toward the south window, which was where Roy had calculated he'd be looking based on his positioning over the past hour. He heard Ethan on the second-to-last step, turned, and that was as far as the sequence went. Ethan was fast in a way that didn't announce itself, that arrived before the other person had finished understanding what was happening. The man went down. Ethan caught him before he hit the floor. Roy's voice. "Position 1 is at the door. No movement." The corridor was dim. 3 doors. The middle one had a line of light under it, and the sound of a television playing low. The man outside it was standing with his back to Ethan, facing the door. He turned at the wrong moment, or the right one, depending on your perspective. And the exchange that followed was brief and quiet and conclusive. Ethan opened the middle door. Lily was sitting on a folding chair with a blanket on her lap and a bag of plain crackers on the floor beside her, and the expression of a child who had decided that the best strategy available to her was patience. When she saw Ethan, that expression collapsed completely, and for 1 second she was just 8 years old and frightened, and her father was there. She didn't make a sound. She crossed the room and he went down on one knee and caught her, and she pressed her face against his shoulder and held on with both arms, and he held on back, his hand on the back of her head, his eyes still on the door. He held her for 10 seconds, maybe 15. Crackers are gone, he said into her hair. I told you they were bad, she said, her voice muffled against his jacket. Come on. He stood up, keeping her hand, and they went out the door. But Damien Cross was in his car on Lakeshore Drive when his phone started receiving calls he didn't answer. The first was from the number he'd assigned to the warehouse, then two more from the same number, then a different number, someone else in the network, someone whose involvement was known only to 4 people in the world and who was calling him now, which meant something had gone wrong. He was still trying to understand what had gone wrong when the vehicle 2 cars behind him, a dark sedan that had been there since he'd pulled out of his building's garage 40 minutes ago, which he'd noticed and considered and dismissed, activated its lights. Not police lights. Federal lights. His phone rang again. This time it was his lawyer. He answered. Don't say anything, his lawyer said. Not one word. I'll be there and… Where are they? Damien said. Damien, how far along are they? His lawyer was quiet for 2 seconds. They hit 4 locations simultaneously 20 minutes ago. They have the financial documentation. They have the partition files. A pause that had a great deal in it. It's over, Damien. Do not say one word to anyone. The federal vehicle had pulled up beside him now. On the sidewalk of Lakeshore Drive, with the lake behind him and the city spread out ahead, Damien Cross sat in his car for one more moment. This man who had spent 14 years building something he believed could never be touched, who had chosen his vehicles carefully and his leverage points with precision, and his allies with the cold patience of someone who trusted no one and prepared for every contingency. He had not, in all of that preparation, made adequate room for the possibility that a man he'd never heard of, carrying groceries home to an 8-year-old daughter on a November night, would walk into a parking garage and change the shape of everything. The federal agents were at his window. He put the car in park. Inside the warehouse in Bridgeport, Ethan Walker was walking his daughter out into the gray Sunday afternoon, her hand in his, her blanket still around her shoulders, because she'd grabbed it on the way out, and he hadn't said anything about it. Roy was waiting at the bottom of the exterior staircase. He looked at Lily and then at Ethan with an expression that managed to convey both relief and something that was almost, for Roy Castillo, warmth. Bad snacks, Lily told him, by way of greeting. I heard, Roy said. I'll get you a sandwich. Can I have 2? You can have whatever you want, Ethan said. His voice was not quite steady. It was close, but not quite. Lily looked up at him. Her father, who had told her he was coming and had come, who was holding her hand too tight, but she wasn't saying anything about it because some things you understood without needing them explained. You okay? She asked him. He looked down at her. For a long moment he didn't say anything. The Sunday light was thin and cold around them, and the city was doing what the city always did, which was continue. Yeah, he said. I'm okay. She leaned her head against his arm as they walked toward Roy's car, and he let her, and neither of them said anything else for a while. The sandwich. Roy brought Lily was a turkey club from a deli on Cermak, and she ate it with the focused seriousness of someone who had been surviving on plain crackers for several hours and had opinions about the difference. She sat in the back of the gray Subaru with her blanket still around her shoulders and her feet not quite reaching the floor mat. And she didn't ask many questions, which was unusual for her, and Ethan noticed it. He turned around from the front seat while Roy drove. You doing okay back there? Yes. She had a piece of turkey sticking out of the sandwich that she was working to tuck back in. They weren't mean to me, she said, in the careful tone of someone reporting facts accurately. They just said to sit and wait, and I did. Good. The one with the beard said I could watch something on his phone, but his phone only had sports. She looked up. I don't really like sports. I know. I watched it anyway because it was better than nothing. She took another bite, chewed. Dad. Yeah. Were you scared? He looked at his daughter in the back seat of Roy's car with her mismatched socks and her turkey club and her blanket, and the question she'd asked with the directness of someone who understood that the answer mattered. Yes, he said. She nodded slowly, processing this. Me too. She looked back at her sandwich. But you came. I said I would. I know. She said it simply. She had known. He understood that she had genuinely known, from the moment he'd said it on the phone, Not because children were naive about the world's capacity for things to go wrong, but because Lily Walker had spent 8 years watching her father be exactly what he said he was, and she had built her understanding of reliability on that specific foundation. He turned back around and looked out the windshield at the city moving past. Roy was quiet, which was his way of giving space to things that didn't require commentary. The Sunday afternoon traffic was light on Cermak, and the sky had the particular pale quality of a November day that had used up its light early. His phone buzzed. Victoria. He answered. Sarah's team hit 7 locations simultaneously, Victoria said. Damien was picked up on Lake Shore Drive 40 minutes ago. The board members who were compromised, Sandra Kemp and the others, have been contacted by federal investigators. 2 of them are already cooperating. A pause that had a complicated texture to it. It's moving. I have Lily, he said. A silence. Then quietly, is she okay? She's eating a sandwich and complaining about sports. He could hear Victoria exhale. It wasn't a dramatic sound, just a breath, released, the kind that had been held for several hours. Okay, she said. Okay, good. Where are you? Still at the apartment. Sarah wants me to come in tomorrow morning. Formal statement, documentation review. They need to do this correctly. Another pause. Ethan, it's going to be a long process. Federal cases always are. But Sarah says the foundation is solid, and the national security component guarantees that it won't get buried or pled down to something unrecognizable. Good. I just wanted you to know. As soon as I knew, he looked out the window. I know, he said. Thank you. He hung up. In the back seat, Lily had finished the sandwich and was folding the wax paper into a small square with the methodical focus she applied to things that interested her. Roy glanced at her in the rearview mirror with an expression that, on another face, would have been a smile. She okay? Roy said quietly to Ethan. She's better than okay, Ethan said. She's annoyed about the sports. Roy made a sound low in his throat. It might have been a laugh. It was hard to tell with Roy. The weeks that followed were not clean or simple, which was true of most things that mattered. Federal investigators moved through Hale technologies the way water moves through a structure that has been compromised, finding every channel, every gap, every place where something had been routed that shouldn't have been. The process was methodical and unglamorous and generated an enormous amount of paper and a great deal of waiting. Victoria spent most of November in conference rooms, going through documents with investigators who asked the same questions, multiple ways, and wrote down answers with the careful thoroughness of people who understood that what they were building would eventually be tested by defense attorneys in rooms with better acoustics. She went back to her office on the 14th of December, a Monday, which felt appropriate somehow, the kind of day that had no pretensions about being anything other than a beginning. The building was the same building. The elevator still moved slightly slower than it should between the 30th and 31st floors. The view of the lake from her desk was exactly what it had always been. She stood at the window with her coffee and let it settle something in her. It took a little longer than it used to. The 7 employees who had been active in Damien's network were gone. Some had cooperated with investigators in exchange for reduced exposure. Some hadn't and were now contending with the consequences of that choice. Sandra Kemp had resigned from the board with a statement that said nothing specific and meant everything in the spaces between the words. The 2 board members who had resisted Damien's push to remove Victoria had sent her a joint email the morning after the arrest that said simply, "Glad you're back." She had read that email 3 times. The company itself was damaged but not destroyed, which was the realistic best-case outcome. And Victoria was too honest with herself to pretend otherwise. Clients had questions. Investors had questions. The press had questions. She answered all of them with the same posture she had held throughout, direct, specific, and without the kind of performed humility that was actually a form of reputation management. She wasn't performing anything. She was just telling the truth, which turned out to be its own form of authority. She hired new people. She rebuilt the security structure from the ground up, this time with protocols she designed herself, based on the specific vulnerabilities Damien had exploited. She promoted 3 people who had stayed quiet during the worst weeks, not because they were afraid, but because they genuinely hadn't known what was happening, and she had come to understand the difference between the two. Marcus Webb got a title that reflected what he had actually been doing for the past 2 years. He accepted it without making a speech about it, which was one of the things she appreciated most about him. There were days that were hard in ways she hadn't fully anticipated. Not the press days or the investor calls or the internal meetings where people were still recalibrating their trust in the institution. Those were hard in knowable ways. The harder days were the ones when she walked past Damien's old office, now reassigned, now occupied by someone with no connection to any of it, and felt the specific dissonance of a space that looked ordinary but carried the residue of something it took time to name. Betrayal was not a sharp wound. It was a slow one. It kept finding new angles. She talked to a therapist about that. She would not have done so 18 months ago, before November, before a parking garage in winter, and a man with grocery bags who had no reason to help her, but did. She had spent most of her adult life treating the interior of herself like an area that didn't need maintenance as long as the exterior was functional. She understood now that this was exactly the kind of reasoning that made people useful to operators like Damien Cross. People who were alone in ways they didn't acknowledge were easier to isolate further. She was working on that. It was slow work. Ethan took Lily to the aquarium the Saturday after everything came apart because he had promised her they would go before winter, and keeping promises was something he was serious about. They spent 3 hours looking at fish. Lily had detailed questions about each exhibit that the staff answered with varying levels of patience and expertise. Ethan bought her a stuffed manta ray from the gift shop that she named Gerald, after the man at Patsy's diner who had brought them coffee and a first aid kit without being asked. She had asked about Victoria several times in the days after the warehouse, not with anxiety, with the practical curiosity she applied to most things. Were they going to see her again? Was she okay? Did they know she hadn't had good snacks either, probably? "We'll see her," Ethan said. "When?" "When things settle down a little." How settled is settled? He hadn't had a good answer for that. The honest answer was that he wasn't sure how to navigate what came after an experience like the one they'd been through, the specific social and emotional geometry of it. He and Victoria had spent 12 days in close proximity under conditions that stripped away most of the usual social buffer, the gradual getting to know someone that happened over months of ordinary context. They had moved past that buffer fast and out of necessity, and what they had found on the other side was a kind of knowledge of each other that was real but also strange, because it had been built entirely in the dark. He thought about her more than he would have expected. Not constantly, just the way you thought about someone who had seen you at a particular angle that nobody else had, and hadn't looked away. He had his life back, which was the right phrase for it. It just took a while to feel entirely true. He repaired a bathroom on the north side for a contractor who didn't ask any questions about where he'd been for 3 weeks, which Ethan appreciated. He took Lily to school and picked her up and made dinner 4 nights out of 7 and let her watch an extra episode of her show on Fridays because she'd figured out that if she brought it up early enough in the evening, before he'd registered the time, he almost always said yes. She was 8. She was going to be 9 in March. He thought about that, about how fast it moved, the specific velocity of a child's becoming, how the person she was now was already different from the person she'd been a year ago and would be different again by the time March arrived. He was not a man who thought sentimentally about time in general. About Lily's time, he thought about it often. Roy came over for dinner twice in December. He ate without ceremony and talked about other things. And once, when Lily had gone to bed and they were sitting with the last of a bottle of beer each, said, "You did good, Walker," in a tone that carried no particular decoration. Ethan said nothing back, which was the appropriate response. Roy had not expected one. Sarah Okafor called in mid-December to update him on the federal case, which she would have done regardless, since he was technically a witness with information relevant to several elements of the investigation. And at the end of the call, after the professional portion, she said, "You should call people more often." "I'll try," he said, same as he'd said in the bar. "You've been saying that for years." "I know. One of these days I'll stop believing you." "No, you won't," he said, and she made a sound that was half exasperated and half fond, and hung up. He sat with the phone in his hand afterward and thought about the version of himself that had existed before November, the version that was managing the distance between who he'd been and who he was now, trying to make those two things coexist without either one contaminating the other. He had been doing that for 6 years. living small because small meant nothing reached Lily, keeping his past in a box because the box kept it from spilling into the present. The problem, he now understood, was that the box had never been as sealed as he'd believed. It had just been sitting there, waiting. And when the moment came, when it always came for people like him in one form or another, the lid came off by itself. He was not sure that was the wrong thing. He was not sure it was the right thing either. He was somewhere in the honest middle of it, which was where most real things lived. Victoria called him on a Thursday in January. Not about the case. Sarah was handling the case, and the wheels of it moved in their own time and didn't need Ethan's involvement for most of what remained. This was a different kind of call. He could tell by the first 2 seconds of it, by the way she said his name without any professional preamble. "There's a diner on Michigan," she said. "I know that diner. I was thinking about going there Saturday morning." He was quiet for a moment. "Gerald makes good pancakes. I've heard that from a reliable source." A pause. "Lily's invited too, obviously. There's a mathematical problem involving the number of pancakes and fairness that I think she's uniquely qualified to resolve." He almost smiled. "She'll take that seriously. I'm counting on it." Victoria's voice shifted slightly. Not less certain, just more unguarded. The particular register she used when she was saying something that had been sitting with her longer than the words themselves. "I've been thinking about what I want to do with the company going forward. What I actually want it to be, not just what it became because I was building it fast and not looking up enough." She paused. "I don't have it figured out. I just have the beginning of it. But I keep thinking I'd like to talk it through with someone who gives actual answers instead of ones designed to protect a relationship." He knew what she meant. He had been in enough rooms with people who gave that kind of answer, smooth, non-committal, calibrated, to understand the specific loneliness of it. The way it made you feel like every conversation was a negotiation rather than an exchange. "Saturday morning," he said. "What time? 9? Lily has a thing at 8:30. I can be there by 9:15. 9:15, she said. "I'll get there early and hold the booth." "The one in the back corner." "Obviously." He could hear the smile in it. He said, "We'll see you Saturday," and hung up. In the living room, Lily was on the floor with Gerald the manta ray, working through something on paper that appeared to involve a complex system of categories. He watched her from the kitchen doorway for a moment. This person he was responsible for, this specific and particular small human who had once been an infant, he didn't know what to do with, and was now an 8-year-old who negotiated the world with a combination of curiosity and stubbornness that both exhausted and astonished him on a regular basis. "We're having breakfast with Victoria on Saturday," he said. Lily looked up. "At the diner place?" "Yeah." She looked back at her paper. "Are there going to be an even number of pancakes?" "I don't know." "I'll bring a system," she said with total confidence, and went back to what she was doing. Damian Cross was formally indicted in February on 11 counts, which included financial fraud, conspiracy, blackmail, and charges related to the national security component that the indictment described in language that was deliberately vague and precisely chosen. His legal team was expensive and competent and filed motions with the specific energy of people who were buying time rather than expecting to win. Sarah Okafor testified in the preliminary hearings with the flat, detailed precision that had made her good at her job for 16 years, and the foundation she laid on the stand was the same foundation that Diane Voss had built from the data, that Roy Castillo had mapped over 6 days of careful surveillance, that Victoria and Ethan had retrieved from a decommissioned server room on a Thursday night in November. The government official, whose name had appeared in Damian's encrypted partition, resigned from his position in January, before the indictment became public, in what his office described as a personal decision. Within 2 months, his own proceedings had begun. The compliance analyst who had helped design the shell structure, the one who had left the Federal Reserve in 2015, had cooperated with investigators from the beginning once it became clear that the alternative was substantially worse. His cooperation was one of the factors that made the financial portion of the case as airtight as it was. Sandra Kemp gave a full statement in December. She had been in Damian's files since 2019, something from her past that she had believed was buried, that he had found and kept and used with the patience of someone who understood that leverage was most valuable when it was held in reserve. She had lived with it for 5 years, making compromises she told herself were manageable, moving the line each time until the line was somewhere she couldn't have found from where she'd started. Her statement took 4 hours. She cried twice. The federal investigators handed her tissues and continued asking questions because that was the job, and she answered them because there was nothing else left to do. Victoria had heard about the statement from Sarah. She had sat with it for a while. She did not forgive it, not quickly, not in the way that resolved things cleanly, but she understood it in the way that was sometimes available to people who had looked carefully at how fear operated, how it moved inside a person and changed the shape of their choices over time. Understanding and forgiveness were different things. She was not confused about that, but the understanding was real. She called Sandra once, in March. They spoke for 11 minutes. Neither of them said much that would have looked significant written down, but the call happened, and they both knew it happened, and that was a form of accounting that didn't have a name but had weight. The company recovered in the way that institutions recovered from damage, imperfectly, unevenly, with certain things restored and others permanently altered. Some clients came back. Some didn't. 2 new clients signed in January specifically because of how Victoria had handled the public communication, the directness of it, the refusal to perform innocence while simultaneously performing humility. One of them told her, in a meeting, that he'd watched 3 other CEOs in similar situations, and all of them had tried to make the story about themselves. "You made it about what actually happened," he said. "That's rarer than it should be." She had thought about that for a long time. She was still thinking about it. The honest version of the story, what she had come to understand in the months after November, was that she had built a good company and had been so focused on making it grow that she had stopped watching it the way it needed to be watched. Not naively. She was not naive. But there was a particular blindness that came with success, a tendency to assume that what you had built was what it appeared to be, that the people inside it shared the architecture of values you had used to construct the foundation. Damien Cross had understood that. He had understood it before he walked through her door. What she took from that was not paranoia. Paranoia would have made her a worse leader, not a better one. What she took was something more like peripheral vision, a habit of looking not just at what was directly in front of her, but at the edges, at the things that were slightly outside the frame. It was not a comfortable habit. It was a useful one. She had also, and this was harder to articulate but no less true, come to understand something about the question of fighting alone. She had spent 8 years building on the premise that self-sufficiency was the same as strength, that needing other people was a variable you minimized because it was a variable you couldn't control. She had been wrong about that. Not entirely wrong, but wrong enough that it had cost her in ways she was still calculating. The people who had mattered in November were people she hadn't controlled. Roy Castillo, whom she hadn't known before Ethan called him. Diane Voss, who communicated through encrypted messages and handwritten notes and had no interest in Victoria's professional reputation or personal gratitude. Marcus Webb, who had held what needed to be held and hadn't needed her to tell him to do it. Sarah Okafor, who had moved because the information warranted moving, not because she owed anyone anything. And Ethan, who had put his grocery bags down carefully because he didn't want the eggs to break, and then stepped forward. She thought about what it meant, not in a sentimental way, but in the practical way she thought about most things. That the person who had changed the entire shape of what happened to her was someone with no stake in her world, no reason to be involved, no angle. He had been on his way home. He had seen something that needed addressing, and he had addressed it. It was not heroic in the movie sense. It was just a person making a choice in a moment when making a different choice would have been completely understandable. She had met a lot of powerful people. She had met people who ran countries, who moved markets, who had their names on buildings. She had shaken hands with individuals whose decisions affected millions of other people. She was not someone who was easily impressed by scale. She had come to understand, deeply impressed by Ethan Walker. Not because of what he was capable of, though that was real. Because of the consistency between what he said and what he did, between what he claimed to value and what he actually did when the cost of those values arrived. That consistency was rare in ways that had nothing to do with any person's wealth or position or the size of the room they could command. Saturday in January was cold in the specific way of Chicago in January, which was not politely cold but aggressively, declaratively cold, the kind that found every inadequate layer and made its presence known. The diner on Michigan was warm and smelled the way it always smelled, which was coffee and something on the griddle and the accumulated comfort of a place that had been feeding people for a long time without making a fuss about it. Gerald nodded at Ethan when they came in and said, "Back booth's open," without being asked, and held up a coffee mug toward Victoria in a question that she answered by sitting down, which he took as a yes. Lily slid into the booth and put Gerald the manta Ray on the table and immediately began examining the laminated menu with the attention of someone encountering new information. "They have the same amount of pancake options as last time," she said. "4 kinds. But if you get the blueberry and someone else gets the plain, they might be different sizes, which is a different kind of unfair." "What's your recommendation?" Victoria asked. Lily looked at her seriously. "Everyone gets the same kind, then you can compare." "Blueberry?" "Blueberry," Lily confirmed. Victoria looked at Ethan. He raised one shoulder very slightly in a gesture that meant he had learned not to fight this particular battle and found the decision entirely reasonable. She smiled, told Gerald blueberry for the table when he came by with coffee. They ate. Lily explained a conflict at school involving a book report and an opinion she'd expressed about the book's ending that her teacher had characterized as unconventional, which Lily felt was an accurate description but not necessarily a criticism, and she was still working out whether she agreed with the implicit evaluation. Ethan listened and asked 2 questions and did not offer a resolution, which was the correct response. Victoria offered the thought that unconventional interpretations of established things were often where the most interesting observations lived, and Lily considered this with the gravity it deserved. They did not talk about November in any direct way. There was nothing left to debrief. That had been done by the appropriate people in the appropriate settings, and the living of it was complete. What remained was not the event but its residue, the way that residue had rearranged things, and the rearranged version of things was simply what was in front of them now. After the pancakes, equal sizes, Victoria had checked, Lily asked if she could go look at the photographs on the diner wall, which were old Chicago photographs that she had spotted on the way in, and Ethan said yes, "Stay where I can see you," and she went. Victoria wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. Ethan did the same with his, which was a habit she'd noticed from the first night in this exact booth and had never mentioned. "How are you?" she asked. "Better," he said. He thought about it, which he always did. "Actually better, not just saying it." "Good." She looked at her coffee. "I'm getting there. Some days are easier than others." "That sounds right. I talked to someone, a therapist." She said it without particular weight because she'd decided it wasn't something to be weighted. "It helps." He nodded. He didn't look surprised. "Good," he said. "You should probably—" She started. "I know," he said. "I wasn't going to finish that sentence." "I know what you were going to say." She looked at him. He looked back. There was a particular quality to it, the kind of looking that had been built in the dark over 12 days of proximity and difficulty, and the specific intimacy of people who had seen each other afraid and continued anyway. "Ethan," she said. "Yeah." "I don't exactly know what this is." She said it plainly, in the way that had always been her mode. "What we are. I'm not trying to define it right now. I just want you to know that, whatever it is, I'm not in any hurry to make it something it isn't, and I'm not going to pretend it isn't something either." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the January cold moved people past the window with their heads down and their coats pulled tight. Inside, Lily was standing in front of a photograph of Chicago in 1962, tilting her head slightly to read the caption. "That sounds right," he said. "Yeah?" "Yeah." He looked at her directly. "I'm not good at fast, and my situation is—" He glanced toward Lily. "Complicated." "I know your situation." "I know you do." He paused. "That's part of it." She understood what he meant. That she knew about Lily, not just that she existed, but who she was, what she required, what it cost him to be what she needed, and had not retreated from it. That was different from most things he had encountered. "Saturday mornings," Victoria said. "Blueberry pancakes. No agenda." He considered it. "Lily's going to keep addressing the fairness problem. I'm counting on it." The corner of his mouth moved in a way that was almost imperceptible if you weren't paying attention. She was paying attention. Lily came back to the table with the purposeful walk of someone who had completed a task and was ready to report. The oldest photograph is from 1931, she said. They had a fire in 1934 and rebuilt it. Gerald's grandfather ate here. She sat down. Also, Gerald said we can have pie. Victoria looked at Ethan. Did Gerald say that? Ethan looked toward the counter, where Gerald was leaning against it with the expression of a man who had just negotiated a side deal with an 8-year-old and was not surprised by the outcome. Apparently, Ethan said. I want apple, Lily said. It's a different category from pancakes, so the fairness rules are separate. Reasonable, Victoria said. There were things ahead that would be difficult. The federal case would run for another year at least, and there would be hearings and depositions and moments when the whole machinery of it pressed into her calendar and her patience in ways that she couldn't fully prepare for. The company would have good quarters and bad ones. People she trusted would disappoint her. People she'd underestimated would prove themselves in ways that surprised her. That was the nature of any institution made of human beings rather than org charts. And Ethan would wake up on certain mornings still carrying something from a mission 11 years ago that he had never completely set down and probably never would. Lily would grow up and become more herself, which was already considerable, and the project of raising her would get more complicated in direct proportion to how capable she became of articulating her own interior. Roy Castillo would continue to show up at useful moments and leave without making a speech about it. Sarah Okafor would continue to be better at her job than most people understood. And there would be Saturday mornings in January when it was aggressively cold outside and the booth in the back of a diner that had been there since 1987 was warm, and the pie was good, and the person across from you had seen you at your worst and was still there, and the 8-year-old beside you was explaining the separate fairness protocols that governed pie, as opposed to pancakes with complete intellectual seriousness. Not everything resolves. Not everything becomes the version of itself you would have planned for, in the calm of a morning before the hard things arrived. But sometimes, not always, not even often, but sometimes, what you end up with is better than the plan. Not cleaner, not easier, just more real. Ethan Walker had spent 6 years building a life that was small enough to protect. He understood now that small hadn't been safety. It had been waiting. He had been waiting for something to remind him that protection was not the same as absence, that you could not keep the people you loved safe by making the world around them smaller. You kept them safe by being present, by being capable, by being honest about who you were, instead of performing the quieter version of it and hoping that would be enough. Victoria Hale had spent 8 years building an empire on the belief that strength was a solitary project. She knew better now. Strength was partly solitary. She was not confused about that. She was still the person who had built a company from nothing and would continue to be that person. But the parts of it that mattered most, the parts that held when everything else was being dismantled, those had been other people. People she hadn't controlled or predicted or managed. People who had simply showed up. Those were the things worth building toward. Not the titles or the exits or the quarterly numbers. The people who showed up. Lily finished her pie first and put her fork down with the satisfaction of someone who had made good decisions. Same time next week, she said. She was looking at Victoria when she said it. 8 years old, direct, uncomplicated, the keeper of her father's emotional state, and the negotiator of equitable breakfast arrangements, and the person who had named a stuffed manta ray after a diner owner because he'd been kind without being asked. Victoria looked at her, then at Ethan, who was watching his daughter with the expression that had no calculation in it, the one that just opened, without resistance, without armor. Same time next week, Victoria said. Outside, Chicago was cold and large and entirely indifferent to the particular small moment happening in the back corner of a diner that had fed people through a fire in 1934 and a pandemic and 4 recessions and all the ordinary weight of the years between. The city did not keep track of the moments that mattered to the people inside it. It just continued. But the moments happened anyway.